Okay, so today we're going to start chapter 2, lesson 1, solving equation with rational coefficients. So remember that a rational coefficient can be a fraction. Those are the more complicated ones, but a fraction, and then two types of decimals, repeating decimals, terminating decimals. So if we see any of those numbers as a coefficient, which we'll find out what that is here in a second, we can go ahead and solve those equations. So we have a couple vocab words today. The first one is multiplicative inverses. Two numbers with a product of 1, such as 3/4 and 4/3, are called reciprocals or multiplicative inverses. You've probably heard the word reciprocals before. I like to use that one instead. So to define it, I'm going to say they are reciprocals. They have a product, which means they multiply product of 1. Describe it, I'd say they look like upside down versions of each other. Remember that we're multiplying. Some examples, they use 3/4, 4/3, half and 2/1, 7/10 and 10/7. Both of those, when we multiply them together, numerators would simplify to 1 and denominators. So it's simplified to 1. Some non-examples would be 1/2 and 3/4. They're clearly not opposites of each other or don't have cross products that are the same. So the inverse property of multiplication says that when you multiply something by its multiplicative inverse or reciprocal, you're going to get 1. And then we're always going to try and work on the side with a coefficient. Coefficient is our second vocab word. The numerical factor of a term that contains a variable is called a coefficient. So they gave us this monomial right here, 3x. The coefficient is the 3 and the variable is the x. So I always think of the coefficient as the number in front of the variable, or it's always the number in front of the letter. So we're always going to go to the side with the coefficient, and we're going to multiply by its reciprocal. And why do we multiply by the reciprocal of a fraction? Well, because when you divide, we could divide both sides by 3/4, but by dividing by a fraction is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So that's why we can do this. So I have a couple questions here. What's the reciprocal of 3/4? Well, that's 4/3. How do we multiply fractions? If we don't remember, that's just straight across. Numerator to numerator, denominator to denominator. So I'm going to rewrite this here so I have a little more room. 3/4c equals 18. I could divide by 3/4, but it's the same as multiplying by the reciprocal of the coefficient. The coefficient is attached to the variable. I can go ahead and write 18 as 18/1 if I want to see a fraction there. So I can see my numerator and denominator, these cross products are the same. So they simplify to 1 because they're multiplicative inverses or reciprocals of one another. Looking over here at the right, 3 goes into 18 6 times. 6 times 4 is 24. Over 1 times 1, which is 1, so I don't need to do that. I could have taken 18 times 4, and then I would have to simplify at the end. Either way, it's fine. Letter C, I'm going to rewrite this one as well down below. We notice that the variable is over here on the right-hand side. If you don't like that, you can rewrite it on the left-hand side. Now the reciprocal of the coefficient is going to be 3/5. So we'll multiply by 3/5 on both sides. Always looking at the coefficient. It's going to tell us what to do. Simplifies to 1 on those cross products. 5 goes into 15 3 times. I'm left with n equals 3 times 3, which is 9, over 1 times 1, which is 1. So we'll leave it there. Letter D, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it again. That's a negative 6/7 p. The coefficient is negative 6/7, so that's reciprocal, or its multiplicative inverse is negative 7/6. You can keep the negative with the numerator always. 7 and 6 simplify to 1. Have that product of 1. 6 goes into 24 4 times. Remember that this is a negative 4 though. Negative times a negative is a positive, so negative 20 or positive 28 over 1, which is just 28. Okay, on to the back. We're going to practice a few mixed numbers. If you start with a fraction, I'd like you to end with a fraction if you can. If I don't want you to end with that, I will let you know. If you start with a mixed number, I like to change it to an improper fraction and then just do what we were doing on the other side. So 1.5s is the same as 2 times 1, so we multiply and then add. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3/2. S, it's a bad variable, it looks like a 5. 16 times 2 is 32, plus 1 is 33 over 2. So the coefficient is 3 over 2. Its reciprocal or multiplicative inverse is 2/3. So we're going to multiply both sides by 2/3. 2 simplify to 1, 3 simplify to 1. S equals 3 goes into 33 11 times. 2 simplify to 1, so I'm left with 11 over 1, or just 11. Some bigger numbers here. Changing this to an improper fraction. Multiply 24 plus 1 is 25. Equals multiply 9, 10 over 3c. Now I left the c on the right hand side, but you could change it to the left hand side. The reciprocal of the coefficient, so the reciprocal of 10/3 is 3/10. Kind of have a c in the way there, but that's okay. We'll just cross everything out with leaving the c there. Seeing if I can cross reduce, 3 goes into 6 twice. A 5 goes into both 25 and 10, so 5 goes into 10 twice. 25 goes in there 5 times. I'm left with 5 in the top, 4 in the bottom, equals c. We could also rewrite this as 1 1/4. Just double check the directions. If it tells you that you need to change it to an improper fraction or a mixed number, you can leave it maybe. So we'll see there. Letter E, we have a negative number. This one's going to end up being kind of ugly. So this is 72 plus 5. So don't worry about the negative until the end. 72 plus 5 is 77. So negative 77 over 8 W equals 108. So the coefficient is here, multiplied by its inverse, making sure we have the negative on there. So then these would simplify to 1. 108 and 77 have nothing in common, which is unfortunate. So 108 times negative 8 is going to be negative 864 over 77. So that's the improper fraction. Unless the directions say to change it to a mixed number, you can leave it like this. But in case you forgot how to check, so we can rewrite that. So I just take 864 divided by the denominator. Tells me it's going to go in there 11 times. So I got my negative 11, and then I keep the 77. So now I'm going to multiply those two. Gets me to 847. To get to 864, that would be 3 more to get me to 50 plus 4, 17. So we get W, these are both equivalent answers, just depends on what the directions ask for. Almost done. These ones, decimal coefficients, because remember a rational number can be a fraction or a decimal. I prefer to work with decimals. So it says in this equation the coefficient is a decimal. To solve an equation with a decimal coefficient, all we have to do is divide each side by the coefficient, which is nice. So I'm going to show you how I show my work. So coefficient is the 0.45. So I'm going to divide, this is a division sign, setting up that fraction, divide by 0.45. And then I don't know what that is, so 3.15. So I get 7. Bring my equal sign down, equals, what's left over here is the n. N equals 7 or 7 equals n. Letter G, coefficients on the right-hand side here, so I'm going to divide by 0.7. Get 1, because I simplify to 1. 0.7 goes into 4.9 7 times, so I get 7 equals t, or t equals 7, either answer. I prefer this one. Last but not least, okay. We have a word problem, we're going to have to set it up. Andy has some fabric that he will use to make curtains. 45%, so I'm going to write that over here. That's what this looks like. 45% or 6 yards, so 45%, 6 yards of the fabric is green. Define a variable, then write and solve an equation to determine how many yards of fabric he has altogether. So we're solving for yards, so I'm going to say that y equals yards. That's my variable. And I know that 45%, or moving that spot, 0.45% of his total yardage is green, or is 6. So I can divide by 0.45 on both sides, and I would get 1 here, and it ends up being 13 1/3 yards, or 13.33, but we know that that decimal is 1/3. So 1/3 of a yard is 1 foot. So that's interesting. But there we go, 13 1/3 yards. Have a great day.